let me officially start our shift series here today. Thank you all for joining. I know we'll have a number of people joining throughout for our second in our shift series here today. So my name is Rishi Maggio. I am the Executive Director here at Greenlight Fund Detroit. Greenlight Fund partners with local communities to identify critical needs for children and families that are facing barriers to economic and social mobility. We then find highly effective and sought after programs that we can expand through local leadership here by complementing the existing landscape of work that's being done in our city and increasing our impact over time. So we're part of an amazing national network of 10 cities and growing across the country, but everything we do here in Detroit is led by Detroiters. So I wanted to thank our founding sponsors, our investors, our advisors, who've always been a part of our process. Also, special thanks to our implementation partners, Strategic Community Partners. Strategic Community Partners is a national firm that works with organizations by organizing, advising, designing, and managing projects that advance equity in our communities. They're based here in Detroit, and we're proud to have this incredible Black-owned firm as our partner here for the Shift series. So why do we call this Shift? Well, what we're doing here is convening residents and leaders who are actively shifting their use of partnerships, tools, mindsets, and power to achieve tangible results in our community. And our first Shift series event last month focused on using both data and feedback from residents to combat child poverty. Our next panel in December is entitled Building Change That Lasts, a conversation with Black women scaling social impact. We'll talk more about it at the end. We hope you join us then. But of course, thank you for joining us today. I want to go over our norms for the session real quickly here for all of our participants. Again, great to see all of you. Please say hello in the chat as we go by. So what we're going to do is have a moderator-led discussion here today. At least the last 15 minutes or so, if not longer, will be for audience question and answer. We will end at 5:15 p.m. At any time, feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom panel to submit a question to our panelists. Again, at the end, we'll have dedicated time to select from those questions from you, and thank you to those who've submitted ahead of time. You can also use the Zoom chat, as you all are doing, to introduce yourselves, to have reactions while our speakers are sharing, and be sure to set your chat function to everyone and not just hosts and panelists. Otherwise, we may not see your chat, and we want you to have everyone participate. Also, you can follow along by clicking on live transcripts at the bottom of your Zoom window if you would like a transcript view of this session. All right, so let's get started and talk about first our incredible panel of Greenlight Fund partners that we have here today. This space is very similar to what we do with Greenlight Fund, where we convene tables of very different types of folks with different interests, but to have a shared priority where we can debate our own agendas, our own issues, and hopefully have collective good. So today is about a critical issue I know we all care about, and that's uplifting our teaching profession. And I want to acknowledge first the tremendous challenges that we're facing today. And not only those needs for today, but the long-term structural change that our panel is going to address. So we want to thank them for their time for responding to these issues and helping us really get into some of the key aspects of uplifting our teaching profession. So we want to hear from you while we go along. Again, please provide things in the chat. If you are on Twitter or social media, feel free to throw comments up on there. The hashtag is Shift313. And one thing we'll have as a starter question for our participants is, what do you think is the most important support that we need to provide our teachers, either in the short term or structurally? Add that to the chat, add that to your social media feed. And so our panelists here today, incredible lineup. Thank you again for sharing your time with us. First, we have a STEM teacher from Jalen Rose Leadership Academy, Mr. Calvin Nellam. As most folks know him as Nellam, we'll call him today, of course. Our superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools Community District, Dr. Nikolai Vitti. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Vitti. The CEO of the New Teacher Center, which is a national program. We're joined by Dr. Desmond Blackburn. Thank you for joining us. And finally, our moderator tonight, who leads the Skillman Foundation as CEO, Angelique Power. So in a second, I'm going to turn it over to Angelique. Each panelist is going to have an opening statement after Angelique asks her first question, and then we'll move into more of a discussion for the latter half of our time together. So I'm excited to hand it over to you, Angelique. I know you've just started here with Skillman Foundation in Detroit this fall. We appreciate you helping us talk through this topic. And so I'll turn it over to you. Please help us set the stage about the teaching profession overall, and specifically the data and context that you think will help us have this conversation today. Thanks, Angelique.
Thank you, Rishi. Thank you for grounding us so well in this conversation and for inviting me, a newbie to Detroit, to moderate today. I've long admired Greenlight Fund and also your leadership in the world. It really is a beacon, so thank you. For those of you that I haven't met yet, I often introduce myself as the daughter of a public school teacher. And what that means is that growing up, we watched our mother work well into the night on lesson plans, grading papers and quizzes, while fielding calls often from students to discuss things that were far beyond what was being taught in the classroom. What it meant was that we were stopped in grocery stores, and students that had graduated years prior would stop my mother and tell her, thank you for the meaningful role that you played at a critical time in my life. And my mother would remember all of their names. She would remember their dreams and their worries. Being the daughter of a public school teacher means that I watched my mother have a Monday dress, a Tuesday dress, a Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that never changed because she could not afford to have a closet full of different dresses. In fact, she often worked part-time jobs to help our family make ends meet. And being the daughter of a public school teacher meant that when I thought about going into teaching, my mother pulled me aside, and even though this was her life's work and she loved her job, she said to me, don't do it. There are too many challenges that you will not be equipped to face, and it's too hard. You will be too unappreciated. Too hard. You will be too unappreciated. During the pandemic, so many of us became adjunct faculty in our children's lives. We watched as kitchen tables turned into classrooms, and we saw teachers become conductors of a complicated symphony right before our eyes. No matter if all the students were remote, if some of them were in the classroom and some were remote, the teacher would bring ideas to life, would add humor, would try to connect even if some of those square screens were dark. They would try to connect even if the chaos of the background in their own homes or in their students' homes started to impinge on the classroom learning. If we didn't know before, we know now that teachers are rocket scientists and magicians. They are therapists and chemical engineers. They are artists and lawyers, all in one class period. They are also human, deeply human. And this very hard, often unappreciated profession needs our attention, needs our gratitude, needs our boldest ideas to ensure that we keep the teachers that we have, to ensure that we surround them with everything they need to double down rather than wave the white flag in this critical moment. This afternoon, we'll hear from visionaries and experts who work with teachers, who have their own personal connections, who are teachers, and who can give us a voice from inside schools and inside school systems. And while it's their job to tell us what is working and where the possibilities are, it's my job to talk about some of the stark data that we are facing, not to demoralize us, but to incentivize us to be very bold in this moment. So I'm going to share a few data points from our friends at Detroit Children's Fund, which is a cousin organization to Skillman, and is a supportive partner to both DPSCD and to charter schools, providing resources and training and fellowships. Data point 1. Between 2006 and 2016, Michigan's teacher workforce declined 16%. And Dr. Vitti, you've gained some traction here, so we're looking forward to your comments soon. Data point 2. Teachers are leaving the profession sooner than ever and at a rate higher than the national average. A mere 3 in 10 Michigan teachers recommend education as a career field, according to the most recent Launch Michigan survey. And likely, as a result, fewer college students are pursuing the profession. Enrollment in teacher preparation programs has declined a whopping 66% since 2009. Too hard, too unappreciated. 92% of Michigan teachers are white, compared to 67% of our children. Why does this matter? Teachers are the connective tissue between what you see and what you will be. A Johns Hopkins study revealed that Black students who had just one Black teacher by 3rd grade were 13% more likely to enroll in college. And those that had 2 were 32% more likely. So what's happening today? What's cooking for tomorrow? How do we seize this moment in history so that when our grandchildren are being taught, teachers are pointing to this moment as the Renaissance, when we catapulted into a different era? Let's welcome our incredible panel and lean into teachers' perspectives. And Nelim, I am going to start with you. As Rishi said, you've been teaching in Detroit for 6 years now. Look at that. What a great photo. And you focus on STEM and robotics. So I have 3 questions I'm sort of pairing together, and then we're going to turn the mic to you. What has your experience been with teaching, and why do you do the work you do? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? And then finally, what do you and your fellow teachers need to feel fully supported?
And could you repeat the questions one more time for me?
Yes, there's 3 of them. What's your experience with teaching? Why do you do what you do? What are some of the challenges that you face? And what do you need for support?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So hello, everyone. My name is Calvin Nellum, and I'm an educator. My mother was a teacher in New Orleans Public School Board, and she said the exact same thing that your mother said to you: don't do it. And she said, if you do it, Calvin, you need to make sure you understand the difference between being an educator and a teacher. All right. A teacher teaches the content area, but an educator not only teaches the content area, they also teach kids how to survive. They teach how their identity reflects in the content. They teach how to be more intellectual, how to be critical. Right. I'm a leader. Right. And I'm in Detroit because it not only forces me to be a teacher, but also forces me to be a leader, which is way more encompassed. Right. Detroit reminds me so much of New Orleans. I have a lot of diaspora connections, and it's the city of one of the most greatest minds. As an educator, I've had investment from the DCF Fund, Black Males Education Association, In Demand. I have all these support systems that want me to be successful because they know my heart is pure, and they know I care about my kids. Right. One of the biggest struggles that, I struggle with as a teacher is just recognizing I am a essential worker. It wasn't until the pandemic that I knew that I was an essential worker. Right. I was blessed to be able to teach from home. Right. But I didn't recognize the actual power that I had because I wasn't treated like an essential worker, and just recognizing that it's just letting us know where we need to go. Right. And then lastly, like what we need for teachers, right? We need respect, right? We want to put some respect on my name, right? When I see see the basketball players and they on the billboards, and I see Blake Griffin, I see all these amazing people. I'm like, they just play basketball, but they don't teach kids science. They don't teach kids robotics. They don't teach kids how to use conflict resolution. We do all this stuff, but we don't have a livable wage. You understand what I mean? I have so many teacher friends that are working 3, 4, 5 jobs just so they can make a basic living. And you can't tell me right now that if I'm in Detroit and I'm working 4 or 5 teaching like jobs and other jobs, I'm gonna be able to be effective or not be tired. You understand what I mean? And so if we're essential workers, give us the framework where we can be essential workers. Increase the pay, give us parapros, give us the resources we need to help our kids. You understand what I mean? I feel like sometimes we're playing 5-on-5, but I only got 3 people on my team. So imagine that, right? You got to not only guard one person, you got to guard 3 other people. You got to do so many other things, right? And I feel like that's why this teacher shortage is happening, because there's no respect on education. So we need to restore that respect, put some respect on our names, and we have to, put our kids first.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to you later to touch on some of the pieces that you just lifted. Dr. Vitti, hello. Nice to meet you. I'm honored to be here with you today and to share some ideas with you. So as I mentioned prior to, oh, and here's your handsome shot too. Prior to your administration, and we're talking just a few years ago, DPSCD had almost 300 teacher vacancies. So can you tell us what you've done to build the leadership pipeline, including recruiting and career ladders and job satisfaction and pay, so that you could virtually close that gap and also invest in more equitable results for children?
Nice to meet you too, virtually. Look forward to being with you, one-on-one. The picture you just saw was pre-pandemic, so it's probably 20 pounds lighter and feeling a lot younger. But with all that said, it's an honor to be on the panel. For us, it's always been about rebuilding DPSCD to the district that once was and should be for our students. And to do that, we were very intentional about investing in teachers. You can't talk about a high-performing district. You can't talk about high-quality education. You can't talk about a district giving students what they need if you're not investing in teachers. Teachers are the core of the work. They're the epicenter of reform. If anything is going to happen positively for students, it has to happen in the classroom. There's no better investment that you can make for students other than investing in teachers. And so everything has been about that. So, we just heard it from Calvin, funding, salaries matter. And so we put our money where our mouth was, and we've increased teacher salaries well over $10,000 over the last, 4 or 5 years, where now our beginning teachers are over $50,000 a year. And that is the highest salary for a first-year teacher, beginning teacher in Metro Detroit, and one of the highest in the state of Michigan. But we've also increased teacher salaries at the veteran level, most veteran, by well over $10,000 as well. So yes, environment matters, support structures matter, but pay ultimately matters. If we really are serious about taking our best and brightest from undergraduate or the private sector, they need to be paid accordingly. And so that was, I think, the centerpiece of our work. But beyond that, it's, having a cadre of teachers to work at central office to provide better professional development, more coaching, more modeling. It was creating a master teacher role at school, so you would have a teacher that teaches part of the day and models the other part of the day, so a laboratory type of environment for other teachers to learn from. It's investing in academic interventionists. These are individuals that have a bachelor's degree, not certified, to work with students in small groups and one-on-one in literacy and math to try to catch students up, so the work being at that grade level is easier for teachers. It's also investing in new teachers. And that's the work we've done with the New Teacher Center, so that new teachers coming in have a mentor and they go to regular professional development to just talk to through the challenges of being a first-year teacher and someone that they can trust and rely on. So, part of that work about the central office teachers, master teachers, was a career ladder, so that, once you do get to a point, I got to the point as a former teacher where I love teaching, never thought I'd be administrator, but I started to see that there were demands of me and opportunities for me beyond the classroom where I could support other teachers and create the kind of culture that I tried to build in my classroom throughout an whole school and an entire district. But for a lot of our teachers, they're not interested in being an administrator. So it's creating that career ladder as a master teacher, as a mentor, to give back to the profession outside of just giving to teachers. So, that's very quickly some of the work that we've done. But as we move forward, it's also about building a pipeline. So we have now something we call On the Rise Academy, where we're taking our paraeducators, we're taking academic interventionists and training them through the school system to be teachers. And we're also working on building some career academies at the high school level to build a pipeline of students to become teachers. And I think that tries to address the challenge of recruiting and developing more teachers of color. I mean, our students are here, they know the opportunity and a challenge. So why not rely on them as being the next generation of teachers and investing in them? So I can go on and on, but those are at the core of our reform. And I think all this is culminated with overcoming that vacancy gap. When we started this initial reform, there were at least 400 teacher vacancies. And I remember coming in and talking to HR and others and said, well, Dr. V, we can't recruit teachers to the district. They don't want to come here. And so part of the change was revamping HR to have people that believe that we could recruit and that we needed to recruit. It was doing all the things that I named. And now we're in a situation where we've hired 100 more teachers than we actually need from an allocation point of view, and maybe have 40 teacher vacancies across over 100 schools, and have hired thousands of teachers. So, and those 40 vacancies are spread out at individual schools. Well over 70% of our schools are completely fully staffed with teachers. In a time where they're hard to find across the state, where schools are moving online outside of Detroit, and we don't have to do that because we are now recruiting and retaining teachers at a higher level.
Thank you. Dr. Blackburn, I want to turn to you. I'll pause for the picture to come up. Yep, there we go. So we've heard from a number of folks about New Teacher Center. Dr. Vitti just referenced it in his comments. You see the plight of the teaching profession, not only here, but you see it across the nation. What's resonating here that also echoes nationally? And what else we've heard a lot of really good ideas. What else do we need to do to really support and nurture our teachers?
First of all, thank you for having me here, and especially among my esteemed colleagues here, Nelum and Dr. Vitti. So much of what you've already heard from my colleagues resonate. So I'll start with the era of teaching that we're coming out of, or national conversation around teaching, where we prioritized things like teacher credentialing, teacher certification, teacher supervision, teacher evaluation, and we did not, unfortunately, prioritize, right, teacher mentorship, support, and ongoing coaching. And so that shift from a national perspective is oh so important. And within the reprioritization of teacher coaching, mentorship, support, not only for novice educators, but for educators across the entire tenure, prioritizing within that this notion of education being a human exchange and prioritizing the humanity in the profession within the mentorship, coaching, and support that is prioritized is oh so important, right? That would be point number one for me. Point number two for me would be the democratization of what I just talked about, right? Specifically from the points of like access, which teachers have access to outstanding, high caliber professional development, ongoing coaching and support. That's not only within a school district, but across the entire country. How well we are doing at tearing down any and all barriers, whether it be fiscal barriers, logistical barriers like technology, ripping them down in order to provide equitable access to high quality professional development, mentoring, and coaching for all teachers throughout their entire tenure. And then within democratization, there's this notion of inclusion, right? So what voices are at the table to influence how we are coaching, mentoring, supporting teachers, i.e., are the teacher voices at the table when we are prioritizing what coaching mentorship looks like for teachers? Do we, especially at the secondary level, but let's not forget the elementary level, are we including student voice in how we think about designing professional development, coaching, mentorship for our teachers, right? Totally important. Third, and I think both Nelum and Dr. Vitti alluded to this, right? It's the professionalization of the profession. So thinking about teachers as high stakes decision makers within schools and school systems, how their voices are brought to the table, how we increase professional autonomy so that teachers truly feel like, because instruction is one part art, one part science, so that teachers truly feel like they have the autonomy to be artists and be scientists as they're dispensing knowledge to children, right? And as Nelum, I think, mentioned, and as Dr. Vitti has worked towards solving, compensation and work environment, those two topics need to be removed from the conversation. We need to earn our way towards removing compensation and work environment from the conversation in order to make for a better pipeline, right, into the profession. Which leads me right to the narrative that currently exists around what it's like to pursue education as a field of study, what it's like to become a teacher, and what career opportunities exist both within the classroom and outside of the classroom. That narrative of what it's like to pursue education as a field of study, as a sector, right, is right now a soiled national narrative, and we need to take that narrative back, right? We need to expose youngsters to opportunities, not only within the classroom, but Dr. Vitti and I professionally had a very similar trajectory from classroom teacher to school and district level leader and administrator. But there are opportunities in the nonprofit world within the ed sector. There are opportunities within the for-profit world within the ed sector. There are opportunities to run for a local, state, and national office, right? And be able to prioritize education within policymaking. Can you think about how rich of an opportunity we would have if you consider the very diverse stakeholder group that a person like Dr. Vitti has to speak to in order to generate resources and opportunities for his district? Can you imagine if all of his for-profit partners, nonprofit partners, if his local, state, and national elected officials that he sometimes has to lobby to, if they were all former, or many of them were former classroom teachers? I mean, just imagine what we would do to the richness of the sector if we were, pardon the slang, if we were talking turkey to turkeys, right? If we were able to have more people running nonprofits, running for-profits, elected officials, and across all business owners, right? And they were all, many of them were former classroom teachers. I think, and they're very influential on the sector right now, that would be, I'm going to quote Vanita, that would be a game changer, right? Thanks, Vanita, in the chat. So those are kind of four things that I see from a national level. I'll repeat briefly, coaching, mentorship, support for all teachers, democratization of the profession, professionalizing it, and changing the narrative around what it means to pursue education as a field.
Thank you for that. I want to invite other questions to come in through the chat or through the Q&A. I want to stay where you landed because we are having a teacher shortage, and it's not just in Michigan. It's something that, frankly, a lot of the states are putting forth really bold, important packages to try to incentivize teachers to stay or to relocate to those states. And so you talked about, I want us to sort of imagine that we are able to put forth the baddest package, recruitment package for teachers, not only existing teachers, but to bring new teachers. We've talked about pay, and we've talked a little bit about mentorship and coaching, centering teachers' voice. What you're talking about, Dr. Blackburn, about teaching is not the destination, but as a portal through which you could get to many other careers. And almost, you didn't say this, but it almost sounds like it could be considered like credentialing in and of itself. Like if you are a classroom teacher, then you are equipped to do many other things. So if we were to say, in this panel, what we would put forward, knowing we're in Michigan, knowing we're surrounded by a robust private sector that could offer things as well, what would we put into that package to ensure that we have the best teaching battalion in Michigan? Dr. Vitti, let's start with you.
Well, for starters, across the nation or just in the context of Michigan, you need to offer a salary that is competitive with other professions. I mean, and I would say, when we say competitive, it seems like we're saying equal. It needs to be beyond that. That's what recruits, the most ambitious people. It creates the most perseverance when it comes to medical school and law school, and that's what we need in the teaching profession. Teaching, yes, it's a calling. There's a certain skill set, but it shouldn't be connected to some kind of understanding that you're not going to make good money, and that you're not going to have that mindset has to change. The skill set that's linked to be an outstanding teacher, it's a different skill set, but it should be as valuable to the society as a surgeon. And that's that's it. I mean, and so that's one. And then two, I always believe that you have to differentiate and create equity when you're talking about urban school districts and urban schools, because the work then in those schools and those environments are harder. So whatever, the profession as a whole, salary has to increase, but then you got to go a little even higher and farther, because then that skill set is even more unique and demanding. And then you have to create an environment where people can feel successful. It might be a calling, you might love it, but can you feel success beyond the individual relationships you have with children? Smaller class sizes, facilities that are beyond standard, and wraparound services for students. So you're addressing issues like mental health, adverse child impact at young ages. And so to go back then, you have to invest in undergraduates to be willing to go down this path. And that's part of what I think about as a package. So thinking differently about paying for college, if you're trained to be a teacher, and then once you get in the profession, you're already making a solid salary to stay committed, and then a clear acceleration of that to keep you in the profession. But investment in the work environment. Sometimes teachers say the work environment is not ideal. It's not ideal because we don't fund and support students the way we need to address all the other issues that get in the way of reading, math, science, writing and the electives and the art. So quickly that's the kind of package and kind of funding that we need. And fundamentally, and I just want to pivot for a quick second, we're talking about teachers, but what we're really talking about are children. That's the key. We're talking about adults right now in this conversation, but ultimately we're talking about kids. If we really, really are serious about children reaching their God-given talent and ability, then we have to invest in teachers. They're interconnected. So we're having an adult conversation right now. We're talking about the profession. If we don't invest in teachers, we're essentially not investing in children.
Thank you. Nelum, I'm going to turn to you, but I just want to reiterate what we are saying so far as part of our innovative package to combat the teacher shortage, paying not just a little bit more, but a lot more. Smaller class sizes. And I think that now we're starting to get into some like systems change, which I also want to come back to. Wraparound services for students, which I think is interesting to put in a teacher's incentive package. Free college, you didn't say that, Dr. Vitti, but having some sort of incentive where maybe teachers are able to have free college. In the chat, we've got student loan forgiveness for teachers who currently are trying to pay that on their salary. Nelum, what else should we add to this?
I think just letting people know when you're preparing teachers that this is not a 2-year, 3-year thing. It's like a 8-year thing. Like I've been in teaching for about 6 years. I was in a Woodrow Wilson teaching fellowship. They said that I have to get my certification and then teach in Detroit for 5 years. I'm on my 6th year now. And I remember Dr. Alicia Merriweather, she told us, she was like, teaching is not a competition. Okay. And if your lesson plan is probably going to take you 4 hours, right? Because you gotta put some time in that. It gotta be robust, right? Because you gotta differentiate it. You gotta make sure you have the modifications. You gotta make sure you got your timestamps. You gotta make sure you got your motivation, and you also got your culturally relevant stuff in there as well, right? It's so many things that you have to do, but the first thing is just recognizing that teachers come first and that it is an investment, right? It's not just like you teach for 3 years and then you have all the power, you have all the control, you have all just the social capital with kids. It doesn't work like that. I've been teaching for about 6 years. I still feel like this is my first year, right? Because last year I had to be a virtual teacher. That was my first year being a virtual teacher. So we got a lot of old school teachers that are virtual teachers, right? And the pandemic taught us about the digital divide, right? And so it's just making sure that we are unearthing these inequities that are not only in our kids, but also with our teachers, right? We have a lot of teachers that are just going through a lot of trauma, right? Losing kids. I've lost 3 kids to gun violence, right? What are the systems in place that's going to make sure that teachers who go through that, right, are fine mentally, they've been helped mentally, right? And we understand the overall outcome of that. Right? I don't want my teachers to leave because they don't believe in the community, right? Or they don't believe in the outcome, or they don't believe in the return on investment, right? And so just making sure that we understand that it is an investment. It does take time, but guess what? You have one of the hardest jobs in the world, and you have one of the best jobs in the world. And if we invest in people, we invest in our future. We invest in our future. We make better decisions. We could be a better, country, right? But it starts first, not in on this last thing. So I'm getting my national board certification, right? Michigan is ranked 35th. So 0.5% of teachers in Michigan get their national board certification. Why? Because there's no financial incentive to that. So you telling me that if I want to be a 6-year teacher, because usually if you get your national board certification, you got to be a teacher for a little bit, right? You telling me that if I'm in teaching for 6 years, I get my national board certification, I go through this entire rigorous process, I can't get a pay increase? So why would I stay here? Why would I stay in Michigan? Why would I do everything that y'all asking us to do, from the teaching to the content to the culturally relevant to the being a counselor? Why would I do all of that even if I try to get better, master my art, master my craft, I still don't get some type of incentive? I feel like the system is just not prioritizing teachers, and we got to reprioritize this.
Thank you, Nelum. So we're adding in, I love this idea that after there's like a longevity clause, so that the longer you stay, you also get like a increase, that we actually pay deeply incentivize professional development, not only fund it, but please.
I'm sorry. We also, we fund teachers to live in the neighborhoods that the kids live in, right? So for example, I live 10 minutes from my school, and I can honestly tell you, and I don't mean this to have a deficit mindset, because I love Detroit. Detroit is one of the richest places as far as like mines, as far as history. It's one of the blackest city. I love Detroit. But I can be honest with you and tell you that when I first moved here and I got my house, that was the first time I heard gunshots, right? And as a 29-year-old, that was traumatizing. So imagine your kids going through that every single night. You understand what I mean? What trauma are they going with, right? So I'm able to, because I live with my kids where they live, I'm able to be more empathetic, more understanding, understand their culture, understand where they're coming from, and tailor that with my instruction.
Thank you for saying that. You know, I was meeting with my board chair, Mary Kramer, this morning, and she was also throwing out ideas. And one of the things that she was mentioning about Detroit is that we have these great companies like Quicken Loans who could sweeten the pot to not only fund for teachers to live in different places, but could provide, you know, housing, dramatic housing incentives. That there are places that could provide cars that would make the incentive package. Dr. Blackburn, I want to turn to you and see what else do we add?
So I want to speak, and I know they're not all on the call right now, but I want to speak to the American citizens across the board and ask if we can't take a look in the mirror and think about how we elevate the teaching profession much higher on the social pedestal, if you will. And here's the example I'm going to provide. One of the things that makes me really, really proud to be an American is that finally, after decades where we didn't do this well, right? As a society, we really know how to appreciate and value and recognize our women and men who serve in our armed forces, right? And especially those women and men who end up making the ultimate sacrifice. I travel quite a bit in my profession. And again, having never had the honor of serving my country, it does my heart a ton of joy when I see military personnel on airplanes being allowed to get their baggage first, right? When I see people giving up first class seats to military personnel. When I go to a restaurant, there's a long wait, but a military person is allowed to jump the line, right? I mean, all of those advantages, those social advantages that we give our women and men who are in uniform, who serve our country, they're just phenomenal. What if we did some of that to America's teachers? What if you walk onto an airplane and they received a round of applause, right? Just for being a teacher. What if first class seats were given up? What if they were given preferential treatment at our restaurants, small business loans, oh my goodness, low interest mortgages, you name it. What if society at large catapulted the teaching profession to the very, very top of the flagpole, if you will, right? And why don't we? High school graduations, right? I'm a 25-year educator. I've attended dozens and dozens of high school graduation ceremonies per year. One of the few, if not only, professions that we segment out and we recognize often at high school graduation ceremonies are those young women, those young men who are deciding to go into the military post their secondary experience, right? We sometimes call those youngsters out by name. The pride that you see in the eyes of those parents and other caregivers of the children that their offspring have decided to go defend our country is just amazing, right? And again, they all know that the ultimate sacrifice is possible, right? But they still do it, and they still do it gleefully. And as Americans, we know how to honor their service. We need to get, so America, I'm talking to you, we need to get there.
Ooh, that's powerful. I left off something that Nelum said about mental health supports for teachers. which I think is really important, that we might be aware of it now, but that's something that we want to always be aware of. And this concept, and I really feel like, you know, you're speaking to the nation, but I feel like we can hear this in Michigan, we can hear this in Detroit, and say to ourselves, and there's a question about what can we do as citizens, as individuals? Well, we all belong to different communities. We all have a way to elevate teachers. You know, I think about how we applaud healthcare workers and all of the things that they are taking on. What is the form of applause that we give for teachers who are every day going in and will continue to bear the burden of our own societal issues? There are so many good questions that are popping up, and I want to give time to this. One of the questions is about why is increasing teacher wages so complicated to make happen? And this kind of goes back, I think, to funding was something that was lifted up. You know, we hear a lot about systemic hacks being the funding formula, potentially. And in a concern, I have to say that I have and others inside of Skillman, we've talked about, we have all these ARP dollars coming to us, American Rescue Plan Act. And, you know, many of us are terrified already that the narrative is already building, like, why didn't we solve every problem with the dollars that are coming through? And that we feel it's really important that we explain what the long-term change to funding needs to look like. Dr. Vitti, do you want to start with the funding formula, or how do we fund teacher salary increase and some of the other things we're talking about?
Yeah, I think you make a great point about ESSER dollars, COVID relief funding. You know, they have different CARES Act money, but you know, we have to remember this is one-time money. So you know, how I often explain to people is you have reoccurring costs, you have reoccurring money. Think of, you know, your paycheck, that's reoccurring, right? Reoccurring expenses, what you pay on your house, your car, things like that. Savings account would be one time. You spend it, it's gone, it's not coming back. So this money that we're receiving one time. What you never want to do when you're running an organization, or in this case, a school district, is tie one-time money to salaries, because it is short-lived, and you're going to create a major cliff at the end of that. Now you can use that for bonuses and things like that, but you can't put it in salary. So that's, I want to build off of the point you made there. But you know, in Michigan, the greatest challenge is, you know, we're not even at equal right now regarding how school districts are funded. You know, the craze has been equitable, but we're not even at equal. And so based on how the state funds schools, it's gotten better. With the money that's allocated from the state is largely similar, but not equal. The differentiator is that wealthy cities, wealthy school districts, to get state aid, have to tax locally at 18 mills, and they tax businesses and homeowners that rent out their properties. Well, you know, in the Detroit context, in nearby, we have Southfield, Bloomfield Hills, and Birmingham. When they tax at 18 mills, they generate enormous amount of money because of businesses in those areas. They get to keep that money, plus the money they're getting from the state. And all of that is reoccurring and is completely flexible. You can use it how you want. So what ends up happening is districts that are wealthier have more money in Michigan to allocate to salaries, which then prevent school districts like us from being competitive. It's not that the superintendent or the school board's not willing to put money in salaries. It's only money in, money out. And I'm not talking about the fact that we educate, you know, nearly 20% of our students are special needs, which is way higher than surrounding districts, or the geographic, you know, space of Detroit and what transportation looks like for that versus some of these other districts that are smaller. But at the end of the day, Michigan needs to move to equitable funding, where it raises the ceiling so that you're accounting for the local revenue that's coming, which would be about $10,000 at minimum for students. And then you use a weighted student formula. Students growing up in poverty, students that are English language learners, special needs, generate more. So then those students proportionally receive more because they need more to be successful. But yeah, districts on their own can't solve the teacher salary issue. You know, you need to, we have invested more, but we're always going to have the have and the have nots based on an inequitable funding model that pits wealthier districts versus poor from an economic point of view against each other, and often we lose because it's a numbers game. And then beyond that, it's directly investing in teachers. You know, when we think about the vision should be we're investing in students and in teachers, and that is a national investment. Take away districts, take away local funding and taxes. We're investing in this profession at the highest level to recruit, retain, develop teachers across the nation, and then offering more for those in hard to staff areas. That's really what we should be talking about, not relying on school districts and local taxes, et cetera, to solve this problem. This is a national crisis.
Is there anything, Nellum or Dr. Blackburn, that you want to add to that?
Go ahead, brother man.
No, Dr. Vitti summed it up. This is not an issue that we can leave right at the hands of the individual near 14,000 school districts across the United States of America. This is a national problem and needs to be addressed in that fashion.
Yep. And then just doing it with a critical lens, right? Recognizing that, you know, just because I'm poor, that doesn't mean that I should get a poor education, right? But currently that's the way this system works. And that's racist, right? And because we know that the people that, you know, are as far as economically, right, you know, they look like this, and the people that aren't look like that, right? And so it's a plutocracy type thing, it's a class thing, and that's why having an anti-racist mindset is so key with our legislators and making sure that they are pushing progressive legislation that affects all of us, right? Those American Rescue Plan dollars, that came from my vote for Joe Biden, right? Only Democrats voted for that legislation. No Republicans voted for that, right? And so understanding that and understanding like how just my small decisions can affect so much, right? Me not paying my taxes can hurt schools, right? Because I live in Detroit now. And so just understanding that, understanding the way that you fit in this whole narrative, understanding how racism and white supremacy culture affects this, we can be more prepared and more intentional and not reactive to these inequities as far as financing and helping teachers and scholars.
One bright light point, we at Skillman did a poll this summer with Michigan children, and we asked Michiganders across the state about investing in children right now. And we found that the majority of people across racial and ethnic difference, across geography, across political divide, not only said that it's so important that we invest more in children, but that they would be willing to have their taxes increase to support it. So that feels like
that's equity.
And we're having a moment. So, you know, we really have to push forward. There's a question by Pandit in the chat. He says, great point on the digital divide, Calvin. Very curious to know how the pandemic has shaped the teaching landscape in terms of in-person and remote learning.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you know, our kids are part cyborg, right? Because this technology thing that they've been using for the last 2 years, it's a part of them. And so just recognizing that when you tell a kid to put their phone away, they're not trying to be personal and disrespect you. It's a, you know, it's a condition, it's an addiction, right? It's something that is going on. And so just recognizing that, right? Having grace, the pandemic taught me grace. I use that word literally every day. You know, before the pandemic, I didn't even know what the word was. It's like, I knew what it was, but I just didn't know how to use it and practice with it, right? We say give grace, but do we practice it, right? And really, really meaning like, if you can't get it done today, get it done tomorrow, right? You know, and not stressing about it, you know, but the pandemic literally, it taught me how to give grace. I learned the word equity, right? And so when I'm teaching my kids, I have to teach with an equity lens. I have to teach in a culturally responsive lens, right? I have to do those things because we know that if kids are on the kids or virtually, I know that I'm only gonna get half of my kids because some of them don't have that infrastructure. You understand what I mean? And so just again, the pandemic, it unearthed so many inequities, but it didn't unearth all the inequities. And we need to make sure that we are continuing and being intentional about unearthing these inequities so we can better serve our kids. But the pandemic, it taught me grace, it taught me equity, it taught me that I am an essential worker. And that when I'm with my kids, you know, we're not only just learning defining meaning of words or graphic interpretation, but we're learning how to be problem solvers, because we need less basketball players, we need less entertainers, we need more problem solvers. We need people that are going to, from the communities, go into the community and help fix those problems. And that's really what I'm really trying to focus on, right?
Thank you. I wanted to see if Dr. Vitti or Dr. Blackburn had any comments about the digital divide. You know, I think we realize not only do we need hardware for students, but that broadband access is a larger issue. Are there any thoughts about moving out of the pandemic, ways that we can help to change this for schools?
And if they don't have anything to say, I can add something too.
They're
Well,
pointing to each other. So, okay, Dr. Blackburn.
just one of the things I'm happy about regarding what happened during the pandemic is I believe we finally, as a sector, turned the corner and established like real appreciation and value for tech-enabled learning opportunities for both children and adults. So yes, there's a digital divide, and that's been with us for some time, but another brutal reality is we have had access to technology for some time now, although, you know, limited. But I think the appreciation and value of what it means to leverage technology for learning, both for big people and little people, that value was not there like it is today. And so I hope that we continue to build on that, because it'll only expand and add to the opportunities for teachers to be at their best and for children to be at their best as well. It's not a solution for all, and it's not a solution for all on all days and all circumstances, but it's absolutely a legitimate option and opportunity that I'd like to see us lean into post-pandemic.
Thank you. I want to go to a question from Vanita Sanders. What are some ways that parents and community can advocate and support teachers, especially in light of the issues created during this pandemic? We talked a little bit, Dr. Blackburn, about ways that we can really understand and treat teachers as heroes. What are other ways, I mean, from policy, advocacy, other ways that anyone listening today can get off the webinar and do something in support of teachers? And I'm asking any of the panelists.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, you know, try to figure out the way your kid learns, like what's their intelligent, right? What's their multiple intelligent? You know, Dr. Howard Gardner, he talks about different multiples intelligence and really using that to have some type of structure in your house that allow kids to do procedural stuff, right? And keep a procedure, put systems in place, right? Put them on a regimen, 30 minutes a day of studying, an hour of exercise, and then 30 minutes going back to your homework, right? But understanding how your kid operates, I feel like that is key. So getting Howard Gardner's 7 Habits of Highly Intelligent People, I think I messed up the title, but multiple intelligence, right? Understanding how your kid operates and just communicating with the teacher, right? You don't have to be a physics teacher. You don't have to be a math teacher. All you have to do is communicate, build that relationship. And we are in that constant communication because it takes a village to raise a child.
I just remind us again, as Americans, and we're experiencing a high of political divisiveness right now, right? And some of it, you know, generated around education, the impact of race, class, culture, and also our dissonance around how to manage through and lead through the pandemic, right? That said, let's spare our teachers being the brunt of our political attack or our political frustration, right? Their jobs are difficult enough where they need not be the recipients of the political frustration that's happening right now across America.
Dr. Vitti, I want to direct a question toward you that came up in the chat, and it's about Marygrove. There was also an audience question pre-submitted, a couple that are asking about elements of the residency model at Marygrove and what might be scalable to other DPS-CD schools. Will you explain what that is first?
Sure. So Marygrove College is a historic college, embedded in the city. It also was known as a teacher college. And so with challenges with enrollment, Marygrove partnered with Kresge, DPSCD, and the University of Michigan to develop a school at Marygrove, run by DPSCD. And the vision of the school is not only to have a pre-K, really early childhood, the 12th grade experience, but it literally puts students on a college campus. And it's very much a neighborhood-based community redevelopment strategy as well. So students can go to a school in their neighborhood and be on a college campus. But beyond that, from a teacher development preparation point of view, in partnership with University of Michigan, we place students that are studying to be teachers at Marygrove to teach with a teacher and work with our students in the classroom to improve their skills to then hopefully be hired by DPSCD. So that's essentially the residency program. And right now it is at grades 9, 10, and 11, next year, 12th grade. And then in partnership with Kresge, there is an early learning component that will be there as well. So our vision is to have, the whole idea of cradle to college, a type of continuum with the same curriculum, and placing teachers at the early grades to just continue to develop teachers for the future. And so that's what that program is about. And then the idea is replicating that in other schools throughout the district. So we're intentionally developing teachers for the future.
That's great. There was a question in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee that said, can you give an example of a time when you were teaching that you did feel respected and heard?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. My school, where it was a data-driven school, it's a 9 through 16 school as well, where we follow kids after college. I'm able to get a coach. We have data meetings and we reflect on our data analysis, right? But the biggest thing was when my coach wanted me to start a STEM curriculum. Like, that was so powerful for me because I never created a curriculum before, and they knew that the kids would benefit from it. And so just telling your teachers, like giving them that autonomy and then giving them the support to do that, and then giving them the funding to do it, right? So they also gave me the funding to do it. And it was transformational, right? And so just making sure that you're pouring into your teachers and you're speaking positivity, right? I became a physics major because I had a person in the physics department that said I could major in physics, right? And so just understanding the power of your words. But I could say that I felt respected when I was asked to create a curriculum. And I feel like all teachers create curriculums, right? You should be in charge of the curriculum. It shouldn't just be a bought curriculum that comes in, because that's not culturally responsive. You want to make sure that you are investing in your teachers, not just financially, but also in their mastery of their content. And creating a curriculum, I feel like, is that. And that was an amazing opportunity because I create all my lessons now. And that was like 4 years ago.
So this was over 22 or 23 years ago, but I felt like I was on cloud 9 when a young man in my classroom acted in a very inappropriate way. I won't go into the details, but he earned himself a suspension from school. And I knew as his teacher, he was having a really, really bad day, and like I couldn't reach him if he was home. I went to the school administration, the principal at the time, and asked that he not be suspended and instead just spend more time with me over the next week or so. And I felt really honored that the principal at the time sided with me and kept that young man in school, basically because of my say-so. I don't think I've ever felt as valued as I did that day.
This is a tough one. I would say I probably felt the most valued. I remember teaching, and I asked the principal to give me most of the students that were learning disabled, LD. I hate the word, but that's what it's used, that had IEPs. I'm dyslexic. I was one of those kids. And I took the kids in my class, and teachers didn't, that was at the high point of accountability, no child left behind. And a lot of the teachers didn't want those students because they were worried that it was going to impact their accountability. And I remember taking the students. It was rough at first because I didn't have them at the beginning of the year and had to figure out relationships and all of that. But I think I vividly remember at the end of the year looking at their results and crying, honestly. Because it's an exhaustive cry, but one of joy, and it just all made sense. And I think times where I was most devalued actually was linked to some of the reasons why I even got into administration, which was I didn't see the administrator creating consistency of expectations across the school. So kids that were in my class, would never act a certain way, but because they were so loose in other classrooms and the expectations weren't there, I saw kids getting in trouble, suspended, fights, and I couldn't handle that any longer by saying, well, they're different in my classroom. And that's what actually led me to get into administration. When I started as a teacher, honestly, I didn't like administrators and I didn't want anything to do with administrators. So that's a little bit of both.
What's interesting about each of your answers, you all spoke about standing in your own power as a teacher and being able to be warriors and revolutionaries and to chart a course forward for your students as you understood was right, not as the way that, the structure of the administration was telling you. I think that's a perfect note to end on. Thank you for being warriors and revolutionaries. Thank you for doing all of this on behalf of Detroit children and youth everywhere. And thank you for this conversation tonight. It was very meaningful. I want to invite Rishi to come back and to close us out.
Thank you all again for spending your time with us this evening, both our participants and our panelists. Again, these are thorny issues. We have to work on them collectively, and we really appreciate our panelists. So thank you to each one of our panelists, and of course to Angelique for joining our community, jumping in and helping us moderate this discussion. As we say, like, these conversations aren't going to mean a lot unless we move them into action. So we hope you'll continue to engage with us, hold us accountable, and continue to do the work forward. Right after this, at 5:15 in 2 minutes, our partners at 313 Reads are inviting you to continue the conversation. If you want to join them, just talk about what was discussed today. You can click on this link, the bit.ly short URL there, and continue a conversation with our friends there. So please do so. Our last Shift Series panel of this season will be next month. It's Building Change That Lasts, a conversation with Black women scaling social impact. And we're going to take a candid look with some great leaders locally here in Detroit who are doing true change work at high levels in the city. We hope you can join us, and you can register for that at any time at shiftdetroit.org. I'm putting that in the chat as well. So again, thank you for joining us. A lot of work to be done. I'm glad we were able to take a break, a breath, examine these topics. And if you have other thoughts, please put them on social media, reach out to the folks on this panel. Thank you all. Have a good week.